From the moment humans first shaped metal, the sword has stood apart. It's more than a weapon, it's a symbol, a tool of power, a cultural icon. Everyone knows the image. A gleaming blade, edge sharp, hilt firm in the hand. But few realize how difficult it was to bring that image into reality. The sword didn't just spring forth fully formed, it had to be invented, stage by stage, as folks wrestled with the stubborn realities of copper, bronze, iron, and steel. Each innovation solved a problem but also revealed a new one. And over thousands of years, those struggles forged not just better weapons, but the idea of the sword itself. This is the story of that long journey, from hammered copper daggers to the first cast bronze swords, from the brittle limits of alloy to the breakthroughs of iron and steel, from crude riveted grips to the elegant balance of a longsword. Along the way, every improvement, every fuller, every pommel, every crossguard was born out of necessity, and every limit pointed the way forward. To understand the sword is to see how need, method, and technology dance together in history. Today we'll follow that dance across 11 stages, each one a step in the sword's evolution, until the weapon we imagine today finally takes shape. In the deep past, when stone still reigned as the cutting edge of human technology, people discovered that certain metals, copper from the earth, iron fallen from the sky, could be hammered into shape. The need was clear, a tool sharper and tougher than stone, something that could be resharpened when dulled rather than discarded. The method was simple: cold hammer the malleable lumps into flat, thin edges. The result was the first metal blades, short, soft, dagger-like implements. These were marvels of their time, glinting where stone could not, a new class of tool that looked and felt different in the hand. Here the need, the method, and the resulting technology converged into a step forward, a new answer to humanity's old desire for sharper, stronger tools. Yet these blades carried their own limits. A hammered edge dulled too quickly, the thin metal bent under stress, and the repeated hammering made the copper brittle. The blade could not grow long without collapsing under its own weakness. What had begun as triumph soon settled into equilibrium, good for small tasks, but unable to replace stone for the heftier demands of combat or work. The very success of the hammered dagger pointed toward its inadequacy, and in that tension lay the seed of the next step. If hammered metal could not yield long, strong blades, perhaps a new material or process could. The story was already shifting toward bronze. With the dawn of metallurgy, humans found that copper could be mixed with tin to form bronze, a harder, more durable substance than either alone. The need had grown, not just a sharper edge, but a blade of real length, a weapon that could withstand the stresses of battle. The method became alloying and casting, pouring molten bronze into carefully carved molds. For the first time, the blade was no longer hammered into reluctant form, but born whole from liquid fire, emerging with integral hilt and leaf-shaped blade. The technology of casting gave birth to the first true swords, still short by later standards, but far longer and stronger than hammered copper could allow. But bronze, too, carried its own contradictions. Cast bronze, while harder, was still brittle when drawn into fine points, and blades longer than a certain length snapped at their weakest junctures. The edge could crumble when striking against armor or bone, and the casting process itself left blades vulnerable to flaws. As swords stretched longer, the fragility became obvious. Large bronze swords broke at the hilt or fractured under stress. The bronze sword was a marvel, but it could not easily escape its own material. Its limits pushed smiths and warriors alike toward further experiments, new forms, new hilt constructions, and eventually new metals. The hunger for reach drove the next experiment: make the bronze blade longer. To achieve this, artisans refined casting techniques, devising grips with flanges or riveted tang plates to anchor the blade more securely into organic handles of wood or horn. Now warriors could wield bronze swords nearly 3 feet long, formidable weapons with increased range and authority. The need for greater reach had called forth a method of better joinery, and the result was a new breed of bronze longswords, their forms elegant, their balance more refined. These weapons appeared across Bronze Age Europe, symbols of status and martial innovation. Yet here again, the very success uncovered weakness. The longer the bronze blade grew, the more its flaws magnified. Casting defects, air pockets, inclusions could not be seen until they broke a sword in combat. The junction between hilt and blade remained a vulnerable hinge, snapping under repeated shocks. Even the best examples could rarely push past 80 centimeters, as the alloy itself imposed a hard ceiling. The attempt to stretch bronze into a true sword created a kind of reversion. The metal itself could not support the vision. The next leap would require abandoning bronze altogether in favor of something tougher, iron. When the first bloomery furnaces smelted iron from ore, the metal revolutionized the smith's work. Here at last was a substance that could bend without breaking, hammered hot into shape under the smith's blows. The need was the same as before: longer, tougher blades. The method, however, had shifted fundamentally. No longer pouring molten bronze, but smelting a spongy mass of iron and forging it into billets. The result was the first wrought iron swords. Dark, tough, hammered into true sword length. Iron did not shatter like bronze, and the smith could shape it at the anvil with far greater control. But iron in its pure bloomery form was too soft to hold an edge for long. It bent and dented in combat, and impurities from primitive smelting often made blades unreliable. Forge welding was inconsistent, and many blades were riddled with slag. Iron had opened the door to longer swords, but its softness threatened to shut it again. The logic of the moment pointed towards one answer: find a way to make iron harder, to manipulate its very nature. The key lay in carbon, the secret of steel. The smiths discovered that by heating iron in contact with carbon-rich material, they could transform its surface into steel, a metal harder and sharper than iron alone. The need had crystallized, a sword that could cut and keep cutting without shattering in use. The method became carburization and pattern welding, the careful forge welding of strips of hard and soft iron into a single blade. This yielded a technology both practical and beautiful. Swords with flexible cores and sharp, hardened edges, often rippling with the telltale patterns of their welded structure. For warriors, these swords were both functional weapons and works of art. Yet the very complexity of the method brought risk. A blade might emerge too hard in places, too soft in others. It seems vulnerable to failure. The performance could be inconsistent depending on the smith's skill and the fickleness of fire. Pattern welding solved some problems but created others, for the balance between toughness and hardness was difficult to sustain across an entire blade. The limitations shifted the focus from material to structure. If the metal could not yet be made perfect, perhaps the way blade and handle were joined could be strengthened instead. To solve the hilt problem, smiths forged tangs, extensions of the blade itself, that could be sandwiched between grip plates of wood horn or bone and riveted securely. The need was for a more reliable bond between hand and blade, one that would not separate under stress. The method of forging tangs and riveting grip slabs produced iron swords more securely joined than earlier cast hilts. The technology gave warriors weapons that felt more like extensions of the arm, enabling heavier and longer blades than before. But the riveted tangs were not a perfect solution. Rivets loosened under repeated use. The grip began to wiggle, and stress gathered at the shoulders where tang met blade. In battle, catastrophic hilt failures were all too possible. The riveted grip had improved reliability, but not enough for true confidence. The next refinement was obvious: a permanent lock, a way to secure the hilt so it could not work itself loose. That answer lay in the invention of the pommel and the peened tang. Smiths lengthened the tang so that it passed through the grip and projected beyond. There a pommel was fixed, and the tang hammered over, peened, to lock the entire hilt in compression. The need was for a hilt that would not loosen, and the method of peening met it with elegance. The technology also gave a bonus. The pommel doubled as a counterweight, balancing the sword and making it more maneuverable. The sword now had both structural integrity and improved handling, uniting form and function in a single innovation. But limits remained. The guard could still loosen, and stress concentrated at the tang's shoulders. Peening required precision. A misaligned tang weakened the whole assembly. And while the sword was now safer to wield, the user's hand was still exposed to the enemy's blade. The logic of combat pushed the evolution further. The hand must be protected, the hilt improved. Thus, the crossguard was born. The next need was not the blade's strength, but the wielder's safety. To protect the hand and guide thrusts, smiths forged crossbars with slots for the tang, fitted them between blade and grip, and secured them with the peened tang. The straight crossguard, or quillon, marked a turning point. The sword became not just a cutting tool, but a more versatile fighting instrument, guarding the hand and controlling lines of attack. The technology of the crossguard opened new possibilities in fencing, where protection and precision mattered as much as power. Yet simple guards had their weaknesses. They could not always stop heavy blows or angled thrusts, and their bar slots could deform or loosen. As blades lengthened, the additional weight and balance problems grew more evident. The hilt was stronger and safer, but the blade itself demanded refinement. The next focus was weight and stiffness, to make the longer sword manageable, and thus came the fuller. The fuller, which is a groove forged or ground into the blade, answered a new need: reduce weight while maintaining strength. By removing material strategically, smiths created swords that were lighter in hand but still stiff in use. The method could be achieved with hammer and chisel or with grinding, and the technology produced long blades that could be carried and wielded without exhausting the fighter. The fuller improved agility, making swords both longer and more effective in sustained combat. But fullers introduced new vulnerabilities. Thin sections of the blade could warp or crack during quenching, and the tools for making grooves were often imprecise, leading to asymmetry. While fullers made handling better, balance and agility were not yet perfected. The logic of refinement pointed to the next step, controlling not just the weight but the distribution of mass along the blade. That meant tapering. Smiths began to forge or grind blades so that they thinned gradually toward the tip while keeping a strong base. The need was to fine-tune handling, creating a sword agile enough for quick strikes and precise thrusts. The method of distal tapering produced blades that combined strength with maneuverability, and the technology yielded swords that could cut, thrust, and recover with elegance. Specialized tips emerged as well, sharpened for slashing or narrowed for piercing armor gaps. But this refinement, too, had its dangers. Over-thinning risked breakage, and tips could snap under stress. The method demanded high skill, and inconsistent steel quality still undermined the best efforts. Distal taper brought the sword closer to its ideal form, but it also exposed the need for better raw material steel of uniform quality capable of holding the entire design together. That material advance defined the next stage. With the mastery of steelmaking, smiths could now control carbon content more consistently, forging and quenching blades with reliability. The need had finally matured, a long, balanced, trustworthy weapon that could both cut and thrust with equal effectiveness. The method combined centuries of innovation, refined steel, careful forging, precise heat treatment, and the technology was the mature steel sword. Spathi, Celtic longswords, and later medieval arming swords embodied this synthesis, with tangs, pommels, guards, fullers, and tapering all integrated into a coherent whole. This was the true sword, not an experiment, but a finished form. The only limits now lay in the metallurgy itself. Pre-industrial steel was still inconsistent, and blades could vary in quality from forge to forge. But the sword as a form had been realized. Beyond this point, development shifted towards specialization: sabers for cavalry, rapiers for thrusting, massive zweihanders for shock. The dialectic of need, method, and technology had run its course to a stable and enduring weapon, The sword, born in hammered copper, had reached its classical maturity. The sword's history is not just a catalogue of metals and techniques, it's a story of human imagination testing the limits of what the hand can hold. Every stage we've traced from hammered copper to refined steel was a response to a simple but relentless question. How do we make this blade sharper, stronger, more reliable? And every time one question was answered, a new one emerged. That is why the sword still fascinates us. It was never just a tool of war, but a constant dialogue between necessity and invention, a mirror of human ingenuity itself.